Lorcan's going to do his very best. We have these black patches on the bottom right. Can you believe it? Otherwise, you'll hear everything else I'm saying when I'm sitting down. So, great. Well, it's wonderful to be here. I've had opportunities over the years. I think, as John was saying, I spent a number of my years not only having a practice but teaching. I spent 2 years teaching at the Architectural Association in the mid-90s and SIARC for close to 4 or 5 years in the 90s. And I made a conscious decision in the late 90s to step away and try to work on my practice, which is a decision I'm very happy that I did. It's very difficult, challenging to do both at the same time. So I did make a concerted effort to focus on one. I'm now leaning back into a hybrid of both teaching again and practice. What we're going to talk about today is a number of criteria that is very, very important to our office. When I say the office, our office is very much a collaboration. We have a number of design directors, Donnie Schmidt, Kevin Tsai, Pierre DeAngelis. We have a number of wonderful job captains, Kathy Poen and Alex, among others, Sherry, among others, and they may be here, some of them. I can see a few of them. But it's been a wonderful experience for me to actually have a collaborative process in our office. And we actually also, our strategy is to also have that experience with the people we work with as well outside of the office. So that's kind of a key issue. It really is a collaboration. I think the work you're going to look at is not only perhaps part of my voice, but it's all the part of other people in the office. This term, ruthless optimism, was something we struggled to find, and when we came across this title for this lecture, we were very excited because it speaks completely about what our office is about. Some of the other issues we're also going to talk about is 4 other key operational strategies. One is ruthless optimism, which is at the heart of all of our designs, contingent patterning, inflected logic, and also reductive thinking. Ruthless optimism describes the office's fearlessness and persistence in the face of real-world obstacles. And that's something I think we all deal with in the practice, real-world obstacles. But in a sense, we embrace it as opposed to fear it. And that's where we came with the term ruthless optimism. I think that that really is kind of critical. It summarizes the ability to experiment with materials, to build well, to engage real-world politics, and to complete the project for a fraction of standard square footage costs, which is extraordinarily challenging to do in this day and age. It's optimistic because it seeks to develop ideas, theory in the real world with the belief that that is indeed possible. Can you combine those? Can you actually bring theory and can you bring real world together? That is our goal and that is our challenge and that is our belief. It is also possible to effect change from the inside of the building profession rather than from a place of theoretical distance, which is also another key issue. We believe and convinced that you can change architecture from the building, from the built environment. That's a key issue for our office as well. Now I did what I was supposed to do, and the slide is not changing. There we go. This is one of the slides that kind of got messed up in the transfer from PC to Mac, so I'll do my very best here. One of the key issues that we address with our office is very simple diagrams. These are a series of courtyard housing drawings that were done by a book that were actually in a book called Courtyard Housing in Los Angeles. It's by Roger Sherwood, Stefanos Palazoides, and James Tice. And this is kind of a very interesting concept with our work. We embrace very simple diagrams. The project I'm going to show you is called Gardner 1050, and in this project we took a very simple diagram. And with respect to the idea of optimism, we were handed this project actually after another architect had started it. We actually had a diagram for the parking layout and also a partie of a courtyard housing. So we started there. Now that's a unique opportunity and it's also very optimistic. So that's kind of the nature of our office. We didn't say no because we'd started from scratch. This also shows that when you look at the project, we're also embracing a very simple idea of a courtyard. Very, very simple diagram. This is the project Gardner 1050. One of the other key issues with this project is, again, as I said, is very simple diagram. What we did is we focused on the idea of material complexity. And that provided a layering quality to the project. It also allowed for fragmentation of the building overall mass and scale, which is also an interesting idea because there is a lot of development. You're always dealing with issues. How are we dealing with medium density? In the city, frankly, that may not have been prepared for it. So this is a building that's actually a 3-story structure, and we were able to embrace the idea to take this very simple idea of courtyard housing, but actually make it about the material complexity. Still, in this image you can see right here, the stair clad is in translucent glass. And this is actually a public gesture as well as a strong vertical element in an otherwise predominantly horizontal composition. Now, pushing the stairwell to the front of the building is a unique opportunity, but it's also challenging. It's not what you normally would do. You would actually have a different facade or a dialogue between the street and the building from the front. But we pushed the circulation because this was the most, with respect to program, the most ideal place to put it. But what we did is we took that opportunity to come up and actually skin it in Profilite channel glass. This is a material that early on in my practice, I came across a great material in Stephen Hall's office called this channel glass. And I actually discovered it because Ram Koolhaas was visiting Stephen Hall and he was talking about this project. It had not been used in the United States, and so when I left Stevens and I came to the United States, to Los Angeles, I wanted an opportunity to use this glass. So what I ended up doing was actually using this on 3 different projects. And the opportunity by doing 3 different projects meant that I could actually get 3 clients to actually pay for the freight from Germany. So that was the big issue with this material. It was like exceedingly expensive to get it from Germany. So that was an opportunity to do it. So this is a project we did recently, but I also used this glass over 20 years ago. The primary materials for the project consist of a painted cement board, cladding, cedar siding, and the Profilite glass, as I mentioned, and the projected aluminum windows. And again, this project is primarily about that, about the material complexity. This shows the key issue of the idea. Very simple diagram, courtyard housing. This shows how cut-out open space provides each unit with borrowed light. And that is something, again, with Los Angeles. Light is an architectural material, and that's what this project was about, to carve it out and create this opportunity to bring light to all the units. Within the courtyard, we also have bridges and vines, mixed materials. Layering in the garden also add complexity. So you can see here, we came up with this idea since within the courtyard to make it vibrant and active. And so you'll see in these following slides how we did that. This also we call the vertical garden in this courtyard. Here's the 2 shots. Actually, this slide is interesting because what it shows is on the picture on the right shows the contrast of the space between the vines and then the matured vines on the left. So on the right-hand side is when it was just starting, but you can see that the left, that the actual vines became architecture and really engaged the space. It also gave an opportunity that on the 3rd level, when you come out of your unit, you actually can have green, which is very challenging vertically. The other issue that we had to come up with vines is it's underneath an it's above a parking structure, which meant that we couldn't plant trees, and certainly plants that go 30 feet tall. So this idea of vines was another way of taking that idea and create what we wanted within green, but within a vertical green. Another view before and after. The one on the right shows it without the vines, and the left shows the vines. It's interesting because this project is with, as John mentioned, we've done a number of projects with Richard Loring, who has a degree in architecture and a master's degree from the University of Michigan. He's our client, and that was kind of critical to these projects. Is when we jumped scale to this larger scale, medium density buildings, it was essential that the client understand architecture and understand that there is a room to do good architecture within the framework of a speculative housing market. That was kind of critical as well. So that's what we were very happy with, to be able to work with Richard Loring in these projects. And you can see in terms of the level of the commitment he made in terms of detailing on this project, because he not only was the client, he was actually the builder. And his background is he was one of the best contractors in Los Angeles. He built a number of Louis Barragan, and he also, early on in his career, and also he was inspired by Barragan, but he also did a Henry Smith Miller, Laurie Hawkinson's build, Israel projects, and La Garetta. So he's very, very, very talented builder as well as a client, as an owner. These are views from inside. Where possible, we carved out a vertical space within the units, which is the view on the left. And on the right-hand side shows the view from the units, which is trying to borrow light from the courtyard. This project was actually a rain screen system. It's a cedar exterior skin, and it was a rain screen system, which is a very efficient way to build. It allows the material to breathe, meaning that it can actually, 90% of the water is actually pushed away from the building, but if in an event water gets behind the wood, it actually dries up because there's an airspace between it, and that's the benefit of rain screen systems. in terms of structural systems. So we use that as kind of a key idea that is actually a smart approach. It means this wood will not have to be replaced. And that's kind of a critical issue within the construction process as well. How can we maintain it? And that was why we used this rain screen system with this project. Now, this is the other slide didn't quite happen. This is my own house in Venice. This was kind of an extraordinary experience for me. My wife and I were looking for a lot that we could afford as an architect. So we came across the least expensive lot in Venice. It was on a secondary highway. It was 25 feet wide by about 48 feet deep. And it was essentially an unbuildable lot. It was driven by site constraints. Very few people wanted to purchase this lot. You could only, with respect to setbacks, only build a 1,200 square foot house there. We bought it because we had the time to fight the battle of variances, and we needed a place to live. So it was a small structure on there that was falling apart. So we lived in it for 3 years. She was a great wife. She was willing to live in a very, very challenging and difficult house, and we made it through. That was kind of one of the key issues. This also represents this idea of unapologetically opportunistic. No one thought we'd be able to do this project when we did it. It's simply not possible. We went for variances of 8 feet in the back, 1 on the sides, and 2 in the front. And there were 7 variances in total to build this house. Now, frankly, if you go for 1 variance, you're lucky if you get it. We actually went for 7. And again, there's that concept of being opportunistic. Actually, there's an interesting story. John Perica, who was the planning head, was the one who was actually the people we actually met on the morning of the variance hearing. And my wife and I were waiting outside for the variance hearing, there was no one there except just the 2 of us. And we were very nervous because there's a condominium, a large condominium behind this house. We were convinced, since we had to notify everyone in a 500-foot radius, we were convinced there would be 50 people there fighting this. Turns out there was nobody there. So it was very funny because he came in, and we were sitting outside, and he was carrying a very heavy thing. And he turned to me and he said no one was there, and he was opening the door to the variance hearing room. And he said, well, if you help me carry this in there, I will approve all of your variances. And sure enough, that's what he did. So extraordinarily enough, we made it happen. We were shocked and bewildered. It was one of our best days of our life. So we got all the variances, which is quite exciting. The site, as I mentioned, is 25 by 51 feet. We ended up being able to build a reasonable house, 2,200 square feet, and it was kind of critical to that size to be able to make this work as a house. As you could see from the previous one, that this is an urban infill project. It was kind of interesting because not only was it just a house, but it also addressed the issues of the urban infill projects, the larger multifamily we were doing. So this was kind of an interesting beginning point for our practice to be able to do this house, to deal with those issues. One of the key issues of this project, and people have always asked, you may have seen this over the years, or you may not, but people have asked me about the idea behind it, what drove the idea. Well, frankly, over about 15 years' time, I had, as I mentioned, been using this profile glass. And what I had done in each job I used it, I would keep 20 pieces or 15 pieces and put it in my office. So for 10 or 12 10 to 12 years, we'd actually carried it. No matter where my office was, we'd carry this glass to the new office. Finally, when I built finally when I built the building, we actually utilized 96 pieces of profile glass in this house. Now, the actual module is 2 feet on this house, and it was driven by the size it would take to put 2 pieces of profile glass. So that's what drove this idea. So when you see the actual module, it's 2 feet wide, and it varies in terms of height, but the module is based on glass that I had in my office. So that was the idea. Nothing more, nothing less. And that was what drove the idea. One of the other key issues was to, again, address this issue with all this glass. We kind of made the glass drive the project. So not only do we have profile, we have colored glass and we have plate glass. And what was crucial to it was to make this building to really address issues that readdress the idea of urban infill. We did not want to hermetically seal the sides, which is generally what you do for urban infill. If you have a house on either side of a house and it's 6 feet away, you don't want to look in there. Well, we actually embraced the idea of do the opposite. Bring in the light and embrace it. What happened with this was quite interesting is that 2-foot module ended up being in a very randomly pattern, and the pattern actually frames views. A 2-foot module is a very interesting dimension because it actually frames fragments of the buildings on either side, which was something that we knew was going to happen, but in some of these views through the building, you actually see a piece of a pipe, a stucco, and a kind of fragment of a window. But when you frame it, it's quite an interesting composition. So from This is not only a composition from the street, the building, but actually from inside to the outside. It also has a dynamic. A view in the back. This also shows the idea of one of the variances was that stair in the back of the house. We had no room for a garden, so we actually did a roof deck. And from a roof deck, you need two means of egress. So the second means of egress was this red stair, which was a circular stair, which is the only size of a stair we could fit in there because it's only 6 feet wide, that area, and we simply couldn't put a standardized stair there in terms of a scissor back stair would fit. So we went back to the, actually that was one of the 7 variances, and so that was kind of a key issue, but actually architecturally made it even stronger. This view on the right is, it's a steel moment frame in terms of the structure of the house, and the structure, steel moment frame, freed up the skin of the building. That's why we did not need any shear walls. And by not having shear walls means you can actually place this idea of this random pattern, which is kind of interesting in a sense that you don't have any shear wall on this by having a steel moment frame. We also had to do metal studs because a lot of the windows actually butt against each other. So with settling and movement, we couldn't have that. So that's why it's all in metal. It did not move. One of the other issues we were tackling in our office, which is critical, is the idea of contingent patterning. Physically and conceptually, contingent patterning takes the idea of engaging the city as an incremental and always complete growth. That's kind of a key issue. We are convinced that this is an incomplete story, the city. It's very difficult to have a big idea. The city is about fragmentation. It's about an incomplete growth. The idea of the contingent patterning takes that and embraces that idea. Each site suggests an alternate idea. Each program suggests a different design solution, which is really what we're about. That's why when we get new projects, we embrace it, we tackle it. We're not concerned about it. We actually tackle each project with that framework. The intention of this theme is to present the way in which research into urban patterns materializes in building design at multiple scales. As I was saying, my house is one kind of strategy, and the projects I'm going to show forthcoming are also other scales. The abstract urban pattern is reflected in the plan section and elevation. The patterns are contingent as they respond to various programs and sites. It is coding of codes. Corbusier has a quote where he says, "The home is the initial nucleus of town planning. The initial nucleus of town planning is a housing cell, a dwelling, and its insertion in a group forming a housing unit of efficient size." This nature of the goal is to create architecture in relation to the city, but you can start from a cell, and that's what's kind of critical to our project. Our medium density projects respond to urban patterns. That's also a key issue. This also reflects an overall idea of how to respond to Los Angeles' unwieldy political forces. It is difficult to complete a big move in this city. So this is a strategy that we could take called contingent patterning, which allows us to do what we're doing, but also address the city as well as each individual project. We develop single ideas at multiple scales, allowing the diagram to become the design. It's a cell-to-city approach. Again, critical, cell-to-city approach. And we feel that in Los Angeles, this pattern design offers an appropriate model for the sporadic and unsettled growth that continues to develop here. In an admission of the practical constraints imposed on a designer, there is some redundancy in the scope of the patterns. This is a recognition of the fact that not all design patterns can be considered within the scope of a single project. By introducing a rich set of overlapping patterns, beneficial properties are reinforced, increasing their likelihood of consideration of a particular design. This is a very interesting quote also from Christopher Alexander, which shows my age. I was studying Christopher Alexander in 1978 when I was in university, but he's still relevant. The points that he was addressing is equally as important today as it was back then. This is also just an overview of, this is about how we work with single ideas, but how we deal with that single idea over multiple scales and context. These are 9 projects we're working on in our office and how we address it and how our strategy on each project. Again, celebrating this idea of contingent patterning. Equally to that, we also have an approach where the parameters within the parameters, what we work is we look at applied research, which within that framework, we look at programmatic studies, appropriate siting, massing. We reinvestigate existing typologies, which is very important as well. Mass customization, spatial flexibility. You'll see a project where we're really trying to push the idea of how we can rethink the actual spatial flexibility and spatial composition of these units that are these projects we're working on. Refined materials and adaptable construction systems also are constantly looking at, because we have to build these projects. We have to be flexible. We also have to be intelligent in how we look at construction systems, which allow us to create these projects. Equally so, sustainable strategy is very important. Passive design is inherent in all of our projects. The way the nature of how we work with sustainable strategy is not, frankly, from the lead standpoint. What we do is we look at very intelligent approach to each particular project. And that's what drives our projects within the office. This project is Formosa. It's a single idea. It's a multifamily unit we're doing in West Hollywood. And this was a very simple idea. We wanted to create, as opposed to looking at the courtyard strategy, we wanted to look at a very simple idea. What if we put the open space to the side of the building, rather than via courtyard, and actually create a park? So this diagram talks this very simple idea where we created a park. Now this is again a project with Richard Lorcan, who was very open to this idea and actually embraced this idea. So this project is by pushing the building to the edge, we created this pocket park. What he did is he leased it back to the city. So they actually run the park. So it's a very interesting way how you can actually rethink conventions of how you deal with the city and look at very simple moves, but they can great impact these simple moves. With our project, we're trying to push these critical ideas of creating usable urban space. That's a key issue. We did this on this project and also a later project, which is Habitat 825. This again shows how perhaps a park approach taken to a larger context, planners could have influence on this, or by joining their neighbors. You could create urban parks. It's the start of an individual taking control. And you can see in the actual diagrams here is that the standardized courtyard, which is on the left-hand bottom left, you can see how we can have courtyard housing. But equally so, if you look on the right, if we do take this idea where we're pushing to the edge, you can get the swath of park that actually stitches through cities. If that argument could be embraced by neighbors and other areas, then you begin a wider swath of green. So Formosa is, in a sense, a typology or a prototype that conceivably could work within the context of the city. Contiguous open spaces on the right-hand side. That's what the premise of the Formosa project is about. There's a cross-section through it. The underground parking, you can see the diagram of the parking underneath. The building pushed to the left, and then you can see right there that the actual right-hand side is the park. What we're trying to do within the park, the concept of our park was to utilize this idea of 4-foot space. So we had this idea of carving into the 4-foot space, which is above the parking structure, and also get this kind of additive and subtractive idea for the park. This does blur the line between public and private realms. Each unit, frankly, from this embraces the public area. Each unit can see into this park, which is a very interesting concept. You do the simple diagram, it means all the people in a unit look out to a park where there was no park before. Equally so, all the circulation is actually within the secondary skin, which is a metal skin. You can see in the section, the person's working through, it's a very simple diagram, but that's actually circulation between getting into the building, but it also acts as a programmatic drive where the second skin provides circulation. Also, the skin also provides an opportunity for sun protection. It also has this element of layering and transparency to these buildings, which is also key. This is a view from the street. You can see that within the skin, the outdoor skin and the interior skin, we're actually activating not only through circulation, but actually green. We're trying to green vertical gardens again, push this vertically. So this is kind of an idea that if we're going to do and address the issue of a second skin, it has to be driven by programmatic idea. And this particular project was key. Standard loft typology, again, because the pushing the building to the edge and creating the park, that was the organized idea for the project. Therefore, we did not necessarily address the issue of the standardized loft typology. We embraced that because the idea was about the park. Again, what we try to do is pick one idea and push that idea. And you can see here that each of the units is oriented so that they can all look out to the park. This project should be done in about 6 months. It's been under construction about a year. And again, this is with Richard Loring. Just a view. This is an early photograph. It's all framed up now. This shows where the park slab is on the left-hand side, how it steps up to where it's going to become the foundation for the structure on the right, the building on the right. The next issue we're going to address is inflected logics. Following a rational process of design, logic may lead to predictable results. We don't like that. Inflecting, skewing, slanting logic on itself produces unexpected but equally rational outcomes. Inflected logics result in new typologies for medium, density, low-rise housing projects in Los Angeles. It's kind of interesting, this term that really speaks about what our office is about, this idea of inflected logic. I was over at the Monterey Design Conference a couple weeks ago, and Robert Ivy was there, and he was speaking about the work that he admires and is interested in, and he used the label transverse thinking, which is in a sense the similar thing as inflected logic. And transverse thinking predicated on the idea of what separates diagonal thinking, oblique thinking, something that frames how do you address a very simple idea, but this idea of transverse thinking is diagonal thinking, and I think that's what separates architecture from buildings. And that's essentially what we're trying to do in our office, to deal with this issue, and we embrace this idea in every single project. This suggests a transformation from a systematic and rational way of looking at buildings from a structural standpoint to another way of thinking, and that's what we're always looking at. We're trying to find another way to think. Transverse thinking makes it artistic. It elevates the work to this other world. So it's possible, that's our goal, that's our strategy, and I believe been successful on a number of projects, perhaps others maybe not as well. This shows a project that it's going to be completed in about 3 months. It's a Willoughby, it's a condominium. It's a project that's located in West Hollywood on a 10,300 square feet. It takes the standard loft typology and skews it. Exactly what I was saying, inflected logic. It skews it. In this case, we borrowed adjacent space. This building, instead of the conventional loft typology, we wanted to carve into the unit next door. That allowed a wonderful opportunity to borrow that space, which is very unique in terms of the internal organization of this project. And you can see here on this diagram, you can see that the diagram, you can see that we're carving into the right-hand side. So that volume in the top right is actually hanging in the other unit. Down below, you can see rather than simply, you can see below on the diagram, rather than simply stacking the mezzanine over one end of a narrow doublet height space, each mezzanine was pushed into the adjacent space. And you can see that diagram, very simple idea down below. Instead of the bottom left, you can see the vertical line to the right, you can see how it's carving into each unit. This creates a series of rooms which are hung off the demising walls, into which different varieties of spaces could be inserted into the overall loft. Now that mezzanine, you can see in the plan above, you can see each unit, there's this kind of axes that we're kind of pushing apart. Now what's interesting with the mezzanine, it can't conceivably be an office, it could be a sleeping quarters or any of these other components. One of the key issue was, in terms of the process, is how do we do that and how do we soundproof it? Because this is hanging in someone else's unit. And just conceptually, it seems impossible to do this. That how are you going to do that? How are you going to be able to sell these units? How is the client going to be happy to do this? Is it going to undermine his efforts to do what he needs to do? Well, this is something, again, with this client, Josh White, we focus primarily on this idea, and we simplified it, tremendous other ideas we're looking at in this project. We made this the key idea. Equally so, we also carved into the building in terms of having open spaces. So you can see in the top plan, there's these green area represents actually outdoor space that's in each unit as well. It's very dynamic, this space. Not only do you have outdoor space pulling in, you're also pushing into other units. So this is continuous idea is carrying throughout these projects. Each ground level unit is accessed via a private stair, which leads to double height private open space, which extends substantially into the units I mentioned. And again, this was a very challenging project. We had to create a double wall for this hung space, hung additional kind of borrowed space. Project follows through in section as well as plan. So plan in section is the same idea. view on the left shows an early concept rendering. The yellow, pattern yellow, is the space, the borrowed space from the other unit. A view from the exterior. Because our key idea and the organized idea of this project was this interlocking, weaving space, a borrowing space, the exterior skin here is just looked at in an opportunity material research. So this is actually, the building will be wrapped in a metal skin. And this was possible, frankly, because the main idea was internally. So in terms of the exterior skin, it was not critical. It was not the main idea. It was just this opportunity to just address the skin of the building and look at it from an experimental standpoint. And so we came up with a metal mesh, which was approved by the city. There's a view on the left-hand side under construction. You can see the volume projecting from the other unit. The other interesting thing about this project is that the circulation was completely redefined in these units by making this one move. In terms of wrapping the stairwell to go up the 3-story of these units and the 2-story units, what it does is it actually makes you redefine the circulation. So that's another element that actually changed these type of projects. Another project that we were working on is Norton. It's an 8-unit multifamily condominium. It's approximately 1,500 square foot each for each unit. This investigates ways of maximizing light and views within the tightly confined parameters associated with, again, speculative multi-housing projects. The resultant L configuration reorganizes the stack tube into perpendicular L sections. In an effort to free up exterior walls, core spaces were aligned along the demising walls, allowing light and views to be provided on 4 sides of all units. Again, that was the main idea. How do we bring light on 4 sides of these units, which is frankly very unique. Most units you have light from 2 sides, but if you bring light to 4 sides, that's a very unique approach. And that was the very simple diagram we came up with, which drove the idea. It's a view from the street. Another thing that's quite interesting is that by the rational exterior articulation emphasizes an individual unit organized in overall building structural systems. So what you see from this view, you see organized building structural system extruded to the exterior. So this represents exactly each unit. So the exterior of this building represents exactly each unit. You can see on the top the L unit. So each one, the glass became a way of actually define and actually mark what the units are on the inside. This idea was made visible. It was not only conceptual, but it was literal. So it's actually a very interesting project in the sense the diagram was actually extruded and you can see it. Section through the building, which shows the same idea carrying through both in plan and section, the idea. A view towards the entry. The last one we're going to discuss is an idea of reductive thinking. Design centers on interaction between building and landscape and celebrates architecture through removal. Stripping away visual and spatial excesses. That's something very critical to our office. We embrace it. We don't fear that. It's very important for us to look at simple forms. There's a way you can do that, but you can also bring a great idea to that, and that's what's critical to these projects. Thinking distills these ideas into a taut membrane and highly reductive architectural vocabulary. Again, if you take these ideas, you can actually embrace it by making it about this very highly reduced architectural vocabulary, which can give you the opportunity to address the idea. It's also about subtlety, it's also precision, it's refined and it's focused. Understated facades both register the forces of program and structure, while they also disconnect from their imperatives as compositional planes. Through simple geometrically, they oscillate between the compositional and the functional. It's a systematic process, driven approach to design. Very systematic, and it works for us. It extracts clarity from the work, which is again key. We want to do honest buildings. We don't want to do false buildings. We don't want to do pretentious buildings. We want to do honest buildings. It is immediate and it's direct. This last project is a project, Habitat 825. You may have heard about it. It's next to the Schindler House. It's a project that has been, if ever we're an office of Rugged or Ruthless Optimism, it's our office. We took this project, we embraced it. We knew it was going to be challenging. We knew we were going to deal with a number of political forces. We knew we were going to deal with a number of other forces, but never thought for a minute not to do the project, because it gave us an opportunity to tackle architecture and take a challenge. And that's why this project not only deals with an issue in terms of opportunity, but it also in terms of the reductive approach of our work. The massing essentially is composed of two intersecting L's with carved out volumes for common open space. The colors that we use in the building, you'll see, are actually to accentuate the volumes and use of subtraction through specifically located carved out volumes. That's equally as important. But when we look at the project, it's completed now. It also addresses the carve out spaces that we're doing. We're driven by not only the critical issue being built next to an extremely important building, the Schindler House, but also had a dialogue in terms of housing within the context of the city of West Hollywood. This is a view in the courtyard. The organized idea here was the communal space in the middle, the central courtyard. And this also affects this idea of inflected logic. It's a courtyard, but there was a number of moves we made which is critical to this project. One of them was this idea of carving out the space on the left-hand side. The Schindler House is next to this space, so we wanted to do this to let that building breathe. We wanted the Schindler House to have the opportunity to breathe. We wanted, as opposed to have, based on the concept that this is a 35,000 square foot building, it's 4-story in certain areas, we brought it to 2 feet. So there's a number of moves we made, you'll see, to address these kind of critical issues. This is actually a view of the courtyard again. The massing on the left is the 4-story volume in the back area. It starts at 3, but it steps down to 4-story. The right-hand side is the L that's next to the Schindler House. The nature of this building is actually a lighter. The idea, the white idea for color on the right-hand side and the green, the lime green, was critical in the sense that that was the light part of the building. It had to have this element of lightness to it. The left-hand side was heaviness, so that's where we came up with this idea of black and white. Very simple idea, but I think it has a provocative viewpoint. It's a provocative viewpoint for these type of projects. There's not many projects that tackle color in such a strong way. This looks at each unit. As I mentioned, it has carved out, in terms of the organization of the courtyard, also has carved out private spaces. Now, one of the slides we had to delete from this was a diagram that shows what led to this project. The key issue of this project, unfortunately, was a series of diagrams we had, which talks about 3 or 4 critical issues. In this building, the history of it is, we approached the Mack Center and the Schindler House, friends of the Schindler House, and said, what are your concerns? 5 years ago, they said, our concern is we don't want shadows, we don't want your building casting shadows on the Schindler House. I actually have a history of 20 years ago lecturing in the Out There Doing It series, and I love that project. It's critical. Actually, our work in our office has embraced Schindler's work as well as the Neutra House. So in a sense, the DNA of our projects already has this kind of respect and admiration for his work. This project, though, what we did is we looked at the critical issues that they had. So what we did in the project is we actually dropped the building 30 feet on the side of the Schindler House. So it's 15 feet lower. On the left-hand side, we pushed it to 45 feet. So the massing was more dense on the left-hand side, which is away from the Schindler House. We dropped it to 30 feet on the other side. A number of other issues is, in terms of, as I showed you before, we carved out this opening space next to the Schindler House. And we do have this idea that is it possible that down the road, 30 years from now, or before that, perhaps a change of administration at the Mack Center, they might open the Schindler House in the courtyard and actually have events in our courtyard. And I think that's kind of a critical and interesting idea. What if that happened? And that's something about optimism. I think that's possible. I think the nature of our project has that opportunity to actually create the city, but also create the neighbor. And I think that that could be a very strong and dynamic move. And again, we don't have those diagrams. We had to delete them. This is a view at the back side of the building, and this one was looking at, and this was kind of an interesting idea because whereby we had to carve out and erase building in the courtyard in the front of the building, we actually had in turn additive, because by carving out and not having volume in the courtyard, we actually pushed in the backside. So these balconies were required to West Hollywood of 120 square feet. So what we did is, not only do we carve into the building, we project out, but it also gives us opportunity of a dynamic form. This is a view at the front. This one also talks about another key move we did. We made a public park in the front of the building, which is again very unique. Frankly, if you look at the Schindler House, they have a bamboo wall right on the edge. If you look at the other buildings on Kings Road, each one of the buildings, they have a front yard, but they have either a 6-foot hedge or a larger hedge. And this space that you see here is actually private. It's common area. We actually kind of twisted that idea and make it a public garden or public area that people can come by and they can sit and have lunch. It's actually, in a sense, even though it's on a private site, it's actually used from the people. People come sit here at lunch, but it's kind of an interesting, it goes back to the Formosa project where we're trying to really push the idea about how can we rethink these conventions, the buildings, deal with public space. What is that boundary between public and common area? What's the boundary between private and common area? Both of these buildings are rain screen systems again a very good and intelligent way to build buildings. It's very good place. It's a very good way to build because again, it's maintenance. It's a very strong way to build a building to reduce the amount of maintenance. The left-hand building is cedar. I'm sorry, it's redwood with the dark stain. The right is sembonnet, which is actually some composite material. That's a view from the street. View in the courtyard. Every one of these units are actually all the units you enter outdoors. There's no corridors, there's no hallways, it's all, every unit is actually entered through the outdoor space, all 19 units. There are 10 or 11 private areas that open to the common area. We have this kind of ongoing challenge with this project. We have, in terms of our office, trying to fight to actually let the private area make it open. We don't want the private area to be enclosed and separate. So that's why we push the private area. Down the bottom area, frankly, there's 4 different private areas, 120 square feet, which is pushed into that courtyard. So the nature of this building is how we weave the private areas to each one of the units into the common area. Equally so, this walkway on the right-hand side here is 12 feet wide. So it allows for 6 feet of private area for each unit. So the hope is that conceivably, they'll come out if they choose to and use that private area, but it's in the common area, as opposed to a separate enclosed private area. Now, frankly, it's interesting, with people who bought these units, we have addressed the same issue that happens with all these kind of projects. They want their privacy. Some of the people want their privacy. They don't want to be in the common area. We're battling that. We're trying to get them to encourage them. Actually, it's okay. You can actually have this dialogue. You can be in a space, the common area, and have your private area. But it's a very unique kind of a challenge for us right now. That's a view from below looking up to the walkway. Detail shot from outside. I just want to, before I move to the final few slides, I want to also explain that it's interesting in terms of the role of an architect when you deal with political, economic, and social forces. This project was an enormously politically charged project. It was a place that not only culturally and politically, how do we navigate that? How do we negotiate the relationship with the Mack Center? How do we negotiate with the Friends of the Schindler House? How do we negotiate the City of West Hollywood? How do we negotiate a number of other areas in terms of the building process? And it was an enormously challenging process. It's something that I'm very proud of. We were able to create architecture, and also I learned a lot about how challenging this is that we do as architecture. Because what we do, we leave a legacy of a building that will be here hopefully 100 years. So there is a great impact with what we do as architects. What you do is important. So it's very important to have that aspect to your work. It is very important, and you need to push yourself to do architecture. So where do we go from here? This is a view of Shanghai and China. I mean, how does an architect decide what to follow given all the current unknowns? How does an architect learn? I mean, where do you go? What are the currents are unknown? You got global warming, you got economic issues, you got water conservation, among others, and numerous other issues. Where do you go, and how do you educate? What are the critical issues? So it's kind of interesting in the sense that we're in flux, and ideas such as contingent planning are necessary. Really is. I think that with where we are today in architecture and the nature of how there are so many unknowns, This idea of contingent planning is a very good way to approach architecture. It allows you the freedom to tackle your projects, acknowledging that everything is unknown. It's also about finding comfort in the uncertainty. This is Marrakesh, and you can see not only are there courtyards, but they tackle their own concerns and issues by inwardly framing the outdoor space, to give that outdoor space. You can see the density and mass. It's an extraordinary photograph. So with all the changes here in LA and abroad, it's about embracing the uncertainty and change, the double-edged conditions of Los Angeles with ruthless optimism. And we lost the last slide. Thank you very much.